During our presentation today, all the participants are going to be in a listen-only mode. However, you can submit your questions to the speaker at any time today by typing them through the chat feature, which is located to the left of your screen. Questions will be addressed as time allows at the end of the presentation. As a reminder, today's call is being recorded, and it is Thursday, January 20th, 2011. Okay, let's get started. This is our agenda for today. A welcome. We'll talk about the who, what, and why of our topic, and then we'll get into some specifics about what is new in Oracle Clinical RDC 4.6. Specifically, data blinding requirements, conditional branching options, support for flexible studies, and a few other minor updates and features. We will then do a quick demonstration, and as time allows, we will answer some questions. Now, who is our intended audience here? Well, as our poll shows, current OC RDC users who might be contemplating an upgrade is probably going to be one of our biggest audience members. We also see that we have a lot of new users for OC RDC 4.6 who may want a preview of the features before they dive into the application. Also, you may not be an Oracle Clinical or RDC user now, but perhaps you're evaluating the features of the application. And you may have evaluated the application before this latest version came out. So this will give you a quick overview of some of the new features of 4.6. The specific features we are going to look at today, because there are quite a number of new 4.6 features, but the ones we are going to be examining today are the ability to blind or secure the data from update by particular users, the ability to enable or skip sections of forms based on data responses, the ability to enable or disable entire forms, visits, or intervals based on data responses, this support for flexible trials, and also some additional updates. Now, why are these features important? Why are we having a webinar about this? Well, this release, version 4.6, did provide users quite a bit of features that are very important to them. Features that address issues users may have encountered with data blinding, the ease of use for their sites, and the ability to create a flexible study schedule for your more complex clinical trials. So we do want to go over these particular features. This is a very nice release of Oracle Clinical and RDC, a lot of features that the users are very excited about. So this is why we are looking at those today. Now, we do realize that there are a few users who may not be current Oracle Clinical and RDC users, and throughout this presentation, I will be using certain terminology. So just let me go over that for just a minute or two. If I say OC, that means Oracle Clinical. If I say RDC, that means Remote Data Capture, which is the electronic data capture portion of Oracle Clinical. If I say DCI, that's a data collection instrument. That's essentially a case page, a case report form. If I say DCM, or data collection module, what that is going to equate to you is a section of a CRF page. Okay, now that we've got the preliminaries out of the way, we're going to go ahead and start talking about the specific areas of OC RDC 4.6 that are new to you. And one of the first ones we're going to talk about is data blinding. Now, why is this useful? Why do we care about the blinding of data? Well, there may be information that's been added by the sponsor that has no clinical value, but it may influence results, and they shouldn't be visible to the sites. Or maybe we have data loaded from labs or other sources that may have the potential to unblind a study, and we don't want our site users to see that or other users to see that. And there may be the case where we need to have an independent interpretation of data by different users without them seeing other portions of the study which might influence their interpretation. So for all these reasons, data blinding is going to be useful to us. Now we can blind in RDC by controlling users' membership in specific user groups. Each Oracle Clinical RDC user is assigned to a user group. And at the system level, there are configuration controls that will control whether by default they see all DCIs or forms or they see no DCIs or forms by default. If they're an unrestricted user, which would be someone like our normal site users or our data managers, by default they would normally see everything. And what we will do with data blinding is that we will further restrict, we will make what's called an exclusion list to blind them from just the forms they shouldn't see and not affecting those other forms that they access on a regular basis. Then we may have some groups of users that have restricted access. By default, they don't see anything in the application, and we create for them an inclusion list, which will include the forms that they then should see. Now for each study, we can either hide forms or we can make them available, but just in a browse mode. We can also control for a form that a user group can see whether they have their specific normal study site privileges or just be allowed to browse. Now all the setup for this DCI blinding is going to be performed in Oracle Clinical, but it is effective only for the remote data capture on-site system. Meaning in Oracle Clinical, if you do data entry for paper studies, this blinding is not having an effect in the OC side of things. Now let's look at an example very quickly. Let's say we have a study where x-rays are sent to 2 different radiologists for reading and entry of the results via the remote data capture system. We don't want either radiologist to see what the other is doing. We don't want them to see each other's interpretation of the x-rays. And we don't want either radiologist to see any data other than the demography data, and then that data should only be available to them in a browse mode. We want our study coordinators to see, but not update, one interpretation only. The other interpretation they're going to be completely blinded to. And we want our data managers to see both interpretations. Can we do this now in OC RDC 4.6? Well, the answer is yes. What would it look like to the first radiologist? Well, to the first radiologist, in their casebook view, they would see the demographics data, but you'll notice it will be in a browse mode. You'll see the browse mode watermark that will appear across the page. The radiologist, the first radiologist, can open their measurement form, give their input, and update it and save it. However, they can't see any other data. They can't see what the second radiologist is doing, nor can they see any other study data. Second radiologist also can see the demographics information and in a browse mode only. They can see the measurement form that applies to them. They can update that form as they need to, but they can see no other data in the application. Now for the site coordinator normally would be able to enter data in any form. But what we can do with the DCI blinding is that we can make those forms which they should not be able to enter or update. We can make those forms browse only for them, or we can blind them to it completely. And what we see here is that one of the measurement forms is in fact enabled to be seen, but only in a browse mode, and the other one is not there. On the other hand, the data manager, who has complete access to the study, can see both interpretations. They'll see the icons for both of the forms in their casebook view. Now later on, I'll show you a quick demonstration of this at the end of our presentation. Next, we want to talk about conditional branching. Now, conditional branching does control cursor navigation and also enables sections of a form based upon data response given. So for conditional branching, what we can think of is perhaps we are responding to the gender field on a demography form with the value of male or female. If we answer female, additional fields regarding pregnancy for this patient will be enabled. If the appropriate trigger response is not given, so for instance, if they answer male, the site user can't enter data into those conditional fields, and the cursor skips those fields if they were displayed. We can also choose to not display them. Now, conditional branching was previously available in Oracle Clinical for character data entry and for classic RDC entry, but when we got the new RDC on-site a few years ago, it wasn't available there except for indicator structures. Now with version 4.6, it is available in RDC on-site. It is going to utilize the setup that we normally would do for conditional branching in the Oracle Clinical side of things in the DCM questions area. But there is going to be some additional setup in the graphic layout editor. Now we also have a nice choice of either hiding or graying out the disabled conditional questions. We can set a default for our entire database, but we can also override this at the study level so that we could have one study where we gray out questions that are conditional versus another study where we hide questions which are conditional. Now here's what it would look like if we are graying out our conditional questions. This means they are still going to be visible on the form, but they will be grayed out, and we can't enter into them unless we've entered the target response in the trigger field. So for instance here, they're grayed out when we haven't entered any data in demography, but when we enter female, then the pregnancy questions are no longer grayed out. They are going to be available to us for entry. If we would answer male, they would still stay grayed out, and our cursor would navigate past those questions. The same thing below in our other example. If we had marked race as other, the specify field will be enabled. Otherwise, it will not. Here's what it looks like with conditional questions being hidden. So when we move into the form for initial entry, we won't see those conditional questions. They will be hidden on the form. However, if we answer with the trigger answer, in this case female for gender, other for race, those hidden conditional questions will be revealed. some clinical trials are going to require complex or flexible studies with multiple treatment arms with different patient groups receiving different assessments. This is very common for oncology trials. Now, prior to Release 4.6, Oracle Clinical required a strict sequential navigation through a set of clinical planned events in a DCI book. If your patients needed to be on different treatment arms, you did have the ability to make multiple DCI books and assign them to those DCI books, but still, within the DCI book they were assigned to, there was a strict navigation through the clinical planned events in sequential order. With Release 4.6, we have the ability to have what's called a flexible study design. This flexible study design allows multiple pathways to be defined in a single DCI book using conditional logic, and this logic will be triggered based on the data entered for a specific patient. For instance, the logic may make a new set of visits and CRFs expected for a patient. Or this logic might bypass you to a particular visit based upon what has been entered. The RDC on-site interface now has a dynamic display of newly expected visit and CRF data as your patient data is entered. So as you enter and save your data, something called expectedness is going to be recalculated. The system will look at what you've entered and saved, and it will recalculate what visits are now applicable and what forms are now applicable for that particular patient. And it does it dynamically. Now here is an example study. In this study, all of our patients are going to go through the screening visit, and all of the patients will have a completion interval and logs where we normally keep things like adverse events and con meds applicable to all the patients in the study. However, there are certain conditional items that are going to appear in this study. Now, based upon an answer to a particular enrollment question, for instance, that may determine what treatment they should receive in this study. And in turn, that controls what visits and what forms should be collected for these patients. So how are we going to implement this? Well, we're going to use the new flexible study design. And in that flexible study design, we are going to apply what are called rules. We have rules that we can implement that control whether new intervals are going to be enabled or bypassed to. And we also have rules that apply as to whether particular forms will be enabled. So here's an example of some of the rules that we might apply to a study. Any data entered in a demography form in the screening visit might enable visits and forms in the completion and log intervals. So initially, when we would go into our study, for instance, we would only see our screening visits. And once we answered the information about the enrollment, or the demography, the demography information, then it would also trigger our completion and our logs intervals. Now let's also examine an additional rule. In the enrollment form, in the screening visit, there's a question that determines whether this patient should be in treatment arm A or treatment arm B. So once that is answered and saved as complete, it will enable either the intervals that control treatment arm A or the intervals that control treatment arm B. Here's another rules example. Let's say we have a question, was a dose given to this patient? And we also have a question, will the patient continue to the next cycle? If either of those are answered no, then the patient should be navigated to the completion area. Essentially, the remaining visits past that point should be disabled, and what should be enabled for the patient is the completion area. So a response to no to the question, was a dose given, or a response of no to the question, will a patient continue to the next cycle, is going to route the user to the completion interval, bypassing those intervening visits. So essentially, those will drop off their visit schedule, and the next available visit will be the completion. We may also have some rules that apply to particular forms, not necessarily that they apply to intervals or visits, but they determine whether within a visit or across the study, whether particular forms are going to be enabled. And that's going to be something called a Dci Rule. Here's an example where we have a hematology form, and there is going to be a question, was a dose given? If we say yes to this, then within the same visit, we are going to enable an infusion form. Prior to answering that question, that form would not appear when we would look at the visit for that particular patient. It would only be when we responded as yes to that question that the form is enabled. Now, what do we actually see in RDC on-site for these examples I've just given you? Here's the example. If this patient is enrolled in Arm A, our cycle 1 for Arm A is going to be enabled. And we also, because we have demography information, we are enabled with the end of study visit and the log visits. Here's a patient where only demographic data has been enabled. And so at that point, only prior to any data being entered, only the screening information is going to be shown. Now, we may have a rule, for instance, at our cycles that if we say yes to continue on to the next cycle, that the next cycle or the next interval, the visits in that next interval, are going to appear on our visit schedule. We have an interim visit in our RMA cycle 1, and if we specify no to that question, are we going to continue on to the next cycle, instead of having the next cycle visits appear, we are going to, it's going to disable the remaining visits in that interval, and we're going to be bypassed to our end of study. So those other intervening visits drop off. At our interim visit for cycle 2, specifying yes to continue to the next cycle, and then our RMA cycle 3 visits are going to be enabled. At our cycle 1 treatment 2, the dose was not given, so we answered no to dose given. Only visits in the completion and log intervals are now enabled. Visits after the current visit in this current interval are going to be disabled. Here's the example in our Dci rule. Before we answered the question, was the dose given, yes, no, was completed, no infusion form is expected at the visit. We'll still see the column heading for the infusion form, but there's simply a dash in the grid for that particular form as a placeholder. If we said yes, the dose was given, now the infusion form is expected at the visit. You see that represented there with the icon, the expected icon. Now, how does this happen? How does our flexible study design happen? What are our basic steps? Well, first of all, in Oracle Clinical, a study has to be designated as being flexible. We can do this one of two ways. When we first create the study in Easy Study Design, we're going to experience a new pop-up message that asks us if this is a flexible study. Now, one thing to note is that you cannot use the flexible study feature and page tracking both. So if it is a page tracking study, flexible study is not allowed, and vice versa. Now, the second way to enable your particular study as being flexible is to enable the flag in the clinical study states form, and I'll show you that in the demonstration in just a few moments. Now, the next step in the process for for flexible study design would be to define your study intervals and visits. And your intervals are going to be very important because many of your rules are going to be based on intervals. So for those of you who are used to perhaps very basic studies using only your study time interval, with flexible studies, you will have to do much more thinking about defining your interval structure because it will be used very heavily. Then the forms are going to be assigned to each visit through something called an Enhanced Dci Book. This is a new feature that is under the Definition DCIs area, and we'll look at the Enhanced Dci Book in more detail during the demo. We're going to apply rules through this Enhanced Dci Book. Just a quick preview of the Enhanced Dci Book. Our DCIs are going to be added via the Navigator button. We're going to look at our DCIs in a different way. With a flexible study using the Enhanced Dci Book, we'll look at them by visit or clinical planned event. Then we'll apply the rules via the button Interval Rules and also the button DCI Rules. If this is a non-flex study, then those buttons are going to be disabled for non-flexible studies. Now, just one note, you cannot have any data in your study and change back and forth between flexible and non-flexible. You need to make that decision prior to having any data in your study. If you did have any production data in your study, you are going to have to delete all that production data if you wanted to go back and make it a flexible study. Okay, now just a couple of additional updates. There is a customizable patient identifier. There is easier assignment of the Dci Book to our patients. And we also have an update about continuing batch validation even when records are locked. And we're just going to take a minute or two to look at each of these before we go on to the demo. There is now an identifier, which is an optional field that is available in the RDC on-site surround, which contains user-configured patient information. Now, this is using the reference ID field that is found in your patient's form. That data has been available before, but now it is available with a custom patient identifier. It is displayed and searchable on both the home page in the patient list and also in the casebook list on the casebook page. And it could be useful to you for flexible studies. Maybe perhaps you may want to display the treatment arm. It can be defined at the study level as well. Now, it is completely optional to use this new functionality, but if you do use it, it will appear on the main home page in the patient's area with whatever you've set up as your custom label, and also available for searching. It's also available in the casebooks area from the search area. And if you hold or hover your mouse over the patient icon, it will display that additional patient identifier information as well. Now, another new feature in OC46 is the ability to assign or reassign groups of patient positions by range, site, or study. In prior versions, our assignment typically occurred one patient position at a time, and this could be very time-consuming for studies with large patient populations. So now, from the patient's positions area, there'll be a button that will take us to an Assign Dci Book option. Now, our options here for assigning are either to enter a range of patients, to assign to a particular book patients at a particular site that you designate, or you could select all the patients in the study. Now, this can be used for an assignment or a reassignment of a Dci book. You'll say what the target book is, meaning the one you want to assign, and you click the Assign Book button. This would assign your block of patients to that particular Dci book. Now, one last feature that I want to bring up is that there was an enhancement to the way batch validation processes locked records. If batch validation is attempted while a user is entering or updating data, for instance, the system will now skip that document and process it the next time batch validation is executed. There will be a warning message that will appear in your output file, and it will let you know that the document is skipped or was locked. Okay, now that we've gone over some of the basic information, we have a few moments to go through and do a little bit of a live demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It will take just a moment. Okay. The first thing I want to show you is a little extra information about the data blinding functionality. Now, first of all, I did tell you that there was a system level setting that you had to have in place for the blinding, and that's going to be found from the new Users and Roles area. There's going to be a screen called Default DCI Access by Role. There is also a query version of that particular area and also a test version. What you're going to see from this area is the user roles. You will select a user role and then give that particular role the default DCI access of either being restricted or unrestricted. Remember that restricted means that by default a user assigned to this role does not see any forms unless they are specifically granted access to the forms. Unrestricted is essentially the opposite, that the user by default sees all the forms from the RDC application for any study they've been granted access to, and we will have to exclude them from forms that we don't want them to see. Now, how do we do that specifically? If we go to the definition area under DCIs, you'll see another new menu, DCI Access, and also a companion query menu for that same area. Now I'm going to query for some access forms that I already have in place. For a particular study that I have some special access, some special DCI access that I'm applying to anyone who has a site role, anyone who has my Adjudicator A role, and anyone who has my Adjudicator B role in the particular study. Now this portion of it is set by study access. As you can see, we are working with a particular study. So for instance, my site user normally has unrestricted access. So I'm going to make an exclusion list for them which says which forms they cannot see or for which forms they don't get their normal access. So for a form called Measurement A, they will have no access to it, which means when they go in to RDC, they won't be able to see that form. For Measurement B, they're going to be able to see that form, but instead of their normal access, they're only going to be able to browse that form. Now I'm going to highlight the Adjudicator A role. They normally have restricted access, which means they do not have normally any access to any DCIs. So I make an inclusion list for them. I can include, for instance, a form that I want them to be able to see but not update, and that would be my demography form. I'll allow them to browse that. Now this adjudicator is going to have to look at their x-rays and bring up a measurement form A, for which we want to give them their normal study and site privileges. So for measurement A, they will have that access. Conversely, I have an adjudicator B. They are also going to be able to browse the demography, but when it comes to any other forms, the only other form they're going to be able to access is the Measurement B form. They'll have their normal privileges to enter and update that data, but they won't be able to see any other forms. Now I'm going to go to the RDC, and I'm going to show you interactively Adjudicator A. So in my study for Adjudicator A, they see Demog. I open it up. We see our browse watermark. I can make no updates to this form. I also see their special tumor measurement. form, they can make updates to this form and enter data on this form. But they see no other forms. Same thing with Adjudicator B. They too can see the DMOG form. For them, it will also be in browse mode. We see our browse watermark. And they have their Adjudicator B, Measurement B form that they also can update. It's not in a browse mode. They see no other forms. They don't see Measurement A, and they see nothing else. Now, if I look at the site user, we're allowing the site user to see Measurement B and all other data for this particular study. But they only see Measurement B in a browse mode. We see our browse mode watermark. However, it is not affecting any other processing. All other forms they can see as they normally would and update as they normally would. Now, I just want to point something out to you also. You may have noticed the absence of the refresh button. That's another new update that we'll see. The refresh button is gone. Pages refresh automatically. And you may have also noticed the little clock face that shows up on our screen as we go through. That is going to allow us the system will actually be updating the expectedness. Also, just another thing, if we go to the home page really quickly, there's no Go button over here either. When we switch between studies and sites now, we'll pick the study, we'll select the site, and our page refreshes automatically, which was a very nice feature, another new feature in 4.6. Okay. I don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm going to go back to OC and show us very quickly some conditional branching information. Now, for conditional branching, we are still going to use the conditional branch information that we would normally see in our DCM area, where we would specify the target and then the question, which is going to be question group, and question, which is the target. So we have our branching value, which triggers the branch, and we have where we're going to be initially navigated to. So that's the first step. But what we are also going to have to do is there is more work to do in the graphic layout editor for conditional branching in RDC. What we're going to see, I'm going to show you the conditional block. I'll show first the source question. The source question, which is going to be highlighted in fuchsia or pink for those of you who are not colorblind. This is going to tell us a question which does have branching placed on it, which is the trigger. We'll see our target, source and target. It will bring up what our source questions are. We'll say which one we want. And in green, it will highlight the target, meaning if this particular source is answered with the appropriate value, where do we go? It will show that in green. Now, if I show my complete conditional block, what I can also do when I create a conditional block, it's going to create a block area, and I can move these lines, these block lines, to include additional questions which will appear in like a yellowish-orange color. And that area is the area that's going to be grayed out for the entire block. So this allows us to contain not just one question as the target, but essentially there will be we can have multiple questions which can be contained in that conditional block and would be either grayed out or would be hidden from our view. We do that by creating the conditional block. I don't have one to create because I have already created one. I can delete it, however. Okay. I'll show my source question again, and let me create the conditional block just so you can see it occur. I'll create the conditional block. It's been created. By default, it only places the target question in there. So if I want to include something else, like for instance, was the patient ever pregnant, I can just scoot my line down to include it in my conditional block. And same thing, if I want to include any additional information, I can go ahead and do that with my conditional block start line. And then I can save it, and it will validate. Now, just one quick item for you. To control whether this will be grayed out or whether it will be hidden, we have an overall database setting which occurs at the DCI form local setting. In our runtime area, we have a new feature to represent the disabled block as either grayed or hidden. For mine, it's grayed at my database level. And we have that same setting, remember, at the study level, which is going to be under the design area, under the DCI form local study settings. One last quick, I know we are running just a little behind, but one last thing that I was going to show you is some of the flexible study information. Now, one quick thing, to enable a form as being flexible, or excuse me, to enable a study as being flexible, when we make our new study in the Easy Study design, we have that opportunity to say that it is flexible because a pop-up box appears. But if you didn't say that it was flexible to begin with and you really do want it to be flexible, you can go to the Conduct, Security, Clinical Study States area. And if you bring up the particular if I brought up a particular study and wanted to make it flexible, I would check on that particular study as being flexible, flexible study enabled. We cannot enable page tracking and also have it be flexible. Now, we would do our normal definition of our intervals and our visits, but we would have to pay more special attention to our intervals as they are going to be more heavily used. And then in the DCI's area, we would use what's called an enhanced Dci Book to create the visit schedule. Now, one thing that Oracle does recommend is they recommend that you only use one DCI book with a flexible study. I've already created a DCI book for my flexible study. One thing I am going to show you really quickly, there's a Navigator, and it's going to display for us now our clinical planned events and the intervals they belong to. Let me enhance this and make it a little bigger so you can see a little better. And if I look here at my DCI book pages for clinical planned event, it will show me by event any DCMs assigned to this particular clinical planned event. I can also go to the previous or next clinical planned event using this particular button, previous and next. Also, one other quick thing to let you know, there is now a copy feature from the special area. I can't display it right now because my book is active, but it would allow you to copy the list of DCIs from one clinical planned event to another. That's a very nice feature. And even if you're not using a flexible study, you can now do this in the Enhanced DCI book. Now let me just show you some interval rules that I did place in here. I have a rule that says my trigger is enrollment, and if my enrollment yes/no is answered no, it's going to bypass us to the completion interval. I also have an enrollment yes/no that if it's yes, I'm going to enable the surgical interval. I also have a surgery result. And in my surgery result, if the surgery was complete, was set to no, I'm going to bypass to completion again. And I have a surgery result that if my surgery complete is yes, it's going to enable follow-up visits. Now I also have a DCI rule in place, and I have an adverse event and ConMeds summation page, and if I've said yes to any AEs, it's going to enable an AE page, and I have the ability to say, is this just within this particular clinical planned event, or is it something that would enable forms across all clinical planned events? And the same thing, I have a similar one for a ConMeds yes/no. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to RDC. And log in very quickly. I'm going to show you when I open up this casebook for a new patient, the only thing that's visible is screening. I have a trigger off my enrollment. If I said my patient was not enrolled and I save it, it's going to recalculate. And now the only other visit that is enabled is my end of study, which is in my end of study interval. Now on the other hand, let's say a patient was enrolled in the study. It will recalculate that expectedness. And now my surgery pre-op and post-op is going to be enabled. I'm going to switch over really quickly to this post-op surgery result. I have a trigger question here for if this was the surgery completed. If I say yes, then now all of my follow-up visits are going to be enabled. And also I want to show you the DCI rule. When I first go into a visit that has our summary page and then our adverse events and ConMeds area, the adverse events and ConMeds are not initially enabled. Let's say there were AEs, but there were not ConMeds. I'll answer it and save it. It will recalculate my expectedness. So now my AE page is going to be enabled, but my ConMed page is still not enabled. Okay, we are running out of time. Unfortunately, we have run a little bit over. So let me just take a couple of quick questions, and then we will go ahead and log off. Okay, so I'm going to look at some of the, I had a question about the batch validation change, and if the warning result in the status, if we get a warning, do we set to whether it fails or not like we do in TMS now? No, actually it does not fail. It only gives us a warning in the output file, but it still continues on. Okay, let's see a few others. I am scrolling back through to see some of the can provisional DCIs be put in the access list? If your DCI book is provisional, you can add provisional DCIs just as you could before. You can make rules. You can also make rules for provisional DCIs as well as active, but do remember you are going to have to turn everything active before you can use it in production. Also, I didn't really have a chance to demonstrate this, but there is a validation function within the enhanced DCI book that will let you know if you have some type of conflict within your forms. And you can actually create rules for DCIs that are not yet in your book, but it won't let you turn it active, or it won't give you a successful validation until those DCIs are in there. Now, someone did ask that, I did make the comment that Oracle recommended one DCI book, but does this mean that you can only have a single DCI book for your flexible study? No, you can have more than one book, but they do recommend just one. Do we need to enable the study to be flexible in order to use the dynamic form? Let me make a clarification. You can use conditional branching without the study being flexible, but you cannot use the dynamic DCI rules or the dynamic interval rules, which makes entire forms appear or disappear, or bypasses you or enables entire visits and intervals, unless it is a flexible study. Okay, someone asked a question. If you wrongly entered a question and we had data that was wrongly entered and we started to go down the wrong treatment arm, if you changed it back, does OC automatically delete all that wrongly entered data? Well, no, it would not remove the wrongly entered form, but what it would do is it would mark it for you with an N for you to go back and for you to remove that data yourself. You have quite a few questions here. I'm trying to scroll through. Someone did ask if this training is going to be offered again. This basic webinar is going to be posted on our website. It is going to be available on the biopharm.com website within 24 hours for you to review and share with your colleagues. We are essentially running out of time, so I think I am going to have to stop with the questions for now. But if you do need any additional assistance, go ahead and contact us. There is some contact information. Let me pull this up for you. Our contact information at biopharm.com. Also, phone numbers in the U.S., and the United Kingdom, and also an email address where we can be contacted. And this webinar is just a taste of the training that we do provide. We actually, especially since I know we have quite a number of people here who are in the process of going from 453 to 46, we do offer an upgrade class, which is a complete day class where we do provide examples for you to perform some of these tasks as well. And we go over the information in a lot more detail. So please go ahead and contact us if you do have an interest in that as well. Okay, so thank you very much. This does conclude the webinar for today. And once again, please note that the webinar will be available for you within 24 hours. And we thank you so much for your participation. And if you could now, please disconnect your lines. Thank you very much.